Right, this is our Viva. It's the 28th of April, and I'll read out what we did this week. This week we started the threat of international terrorism scene and got placed in a jury. We also finished scene 2, did the brothel scene, which is scene 8, yeah, maybe, yeah, 8. And then we started the mum and dad scene.
What good ideas do we come up with this week?
Do you want me to go first?
Yeah.
Some ideas we came up with this week were that the mum and dad scene would have like, so they would be sitting in a sort of interview and they would be getting manipulated by, it looks like waiters and like waitresses, but they don't know that they're being manipulated sort of, so they're just getting moved. So like if they go to pick up a coffee, you move them to get it and stuff. Yeah, and it just shows that that mum and dad are just sort of going with everything and just sort of not caring about Anne.
We came up with the idea of, well, I decided that scene, what scene is it? Particle scene? 8? Should be a brothel. Simply because the text was very suggestive of either sexual references, a one-night stand, or provocative actions. So it's one of two ways. It could have been a cheap hotel with prostitutes or a brothel, and I thought the use of brothel enabled us to use this entire cast, with all the girls having very seductive movements and the men being the typical masculine walking through, paying their way through sexual favours. Yes, that was my idea.
We came up with the idea of in the threat of international terrorism scene, where we had the lawyers, we had the idea of everything, like the rest of the ensemble playing the jury. So what we're saying and what we're saying within the text is based towards them. So they're reacting from what we're saying, and they created their own like movements to begin with to kind of represent like what a jury's like when they first come into a courtroom before it all begins.
Yeah. What ideas didn't work this week?
I think with some of the mum and dad movement, we sort of went over the top with the manipulating part. So it's nice having like subtle movements, but stuff where they interrupt each other in the text and we would like push them to show the interruption. And I don't think you need such big movement.
It was all too choreographed. It was like it needs to be a little bit more like a natural flow, like it just kind of happens, the movements, not okay, well we're going to push you here now, because it kind of says to.
Yeah, because the purpose of manipulating them was to look as if we weren't even there, so that it was natural for them to reach for a cup of tea and it would just appear. And I felt like we hadn't created this concept. It was, they were putting their hand out before we'd even entered the stage, and it was very like forced at times. So we need to find this like natural flow to our movement. I also didn't think that when we actually started to set the brothel that it was how I imagined. It was too crude at times, so the girls were being too lustful in their movements, and it
looks awkward.
Yeah,
really awkward.
It became uncomfortable because the girls were thinking of how they could show seductive movements, but it wasn't in a pleasant way. And I get that we had to create this dirty, cheap feel, but it was more not brothel and like grungy feel to it. So what problems have you encountered this week?
Well, personally, I think within that scene, I found it really hard to create this sort of character, mainly because of like the idea that we had didn't really work with what they'd become, but also my text within the scene was probably the only part that wasn't sexy. I'm talking about like particles and really crazy, so trying to find like some sort of character that fits in with all this dirty, sort of grungy brothel scene that's talking about particles. I found it really hard to kind of come
How
up
did
with
you
something.
solve that?
Well, we kind of came up with the idea of maybe it was like she was a bit more high or something like that, and it was a little bit more. Oh, it's kind of like they're forced into this world, and it's like her escape as such, and then she kind of realises. But so I'm going to kind of look at like research and stuff into how I can kind of play this sort of character, because it's not really something I'm used to.
Well, the same for my character. I only had one line, but that line was with a man you'll never see again. So to me, that was suggestive of that this prostitute had fallen in love with one of the men. So I had to find this compromise between having my seductive character and then this realistic side to her. Actually, the woman still has feelings. Like, she still is wanting and loving. So it was hard to show on my face and to like say the text with a certain purpose to my delivery, and then to manipulate my body to have a completely different purpose. So to solve that, I had my character of my lustful movement, which was my job side of my character, and then as soon as I said my line, it was broken away, a completely new person, and that was her realistic side. So having it separate was less confusing, and it also allowed me to have a switch between the two.
A problem that I faced this week was